I am going to teach you how to make this. This is what I called the Roses Are Forever pendant, but there's, a dozen versions of this. It is basically a hidden connection, all fired in one piece, kinetic pendant. To do the texture on this, I thought I'd add something different than just using like a template. So this piece that I have here was just a texture with a template cut out. This piece that we're going to make today, I used paste to put layers of like some flower petals onto these pieces. So we're going to do some painting, a little bit of kind of rough sculpting, just to make the pieces our own. You're going to learn how to do these hidden connections on the back. That's all in clay. It all gets fired together. Technically, you can torch fire this. It would be a little bit tricky, okay, but you could. I'll be demoing that throughout the day. This is the project that we're making today, and we're going to start with circular base pieces and then put paste on them to create these flower petal designs. Then dry them, sand the edges of the flower petals to get our shapes. We're going to create coils so that we have two two half circle connections here to make, and make a bail. Okay, so it's all going to be connected. It is once you get to connecting everything, it is a delicate little monster. I will admit. So that's where we got to be ultra careful, but our beginning process is not too difficult. You need a circle template. I used these three. Yeah, okay. And you've got wiggle room. This, was after it's sanded and shrunk all the way. So it kind of shows you where we ended up after all the shrinkage and all the sanding. That piece is 34 millimeter circle. Okay, to give you a rough idea. Again, you can make it a little bigger, a little smaller, whatever you like to do. You've got 15 grams of clay for this project, and you will have a little bit left. So if you go just a little bit bigger, you won't need to worry. Okay, so that one was that size. Then we've got this one, which is 29 millimeters. And then that one, which is 25 millimeters. Okay, so you need a circle template to cut your pieces of clay out. You need depth gauges. We're going to roll these 1 millimeter thick. Playing cards, you need 3 cards, something like that. It's about 1 millimeter thick. You need a clay roller. You need a pretty wide brush that, is a little bit firm. You're going to paint the paste on with a brush. Release agent, water. I have a little hydration cup that I use, so I missed a little bit of water and put my clay under there when I'm working. I also have a water dish. You need a fine awl for cutting your clay out of your template. You're going to need probably 2 different coffee straws. We're going to make the jump ring parts on a 5 millimeter coffee straw, but you're going to put a bail on the back as well. The bail design is completely up to you. I'd probably make a bail a little bit thicker than a 5 millimeter straw because it's going to shrink quite a bit. So probably need 2 coffee straws. Sanding equipment. You're going to want a sander that can go kind of in these recessed areas. So I'm going to jump right in, roll my first couple pieces, explain how the clay works, all that good stuff. Okay. This is probably the most important thing that I'm going to teach you today. The rest of it's all design work, but this is important. Okay. The first thing that you notice, it's pretty firm. Okay. That is on purpose. So there's a little tear tab over here, and inside you have a vacuum sealed thing that will open up and let you take the clay right out of it. Okay. I usually save that. That's how I store my clay all the time. I don't put my clay like in special cups or anything like that to keep it hydrated. It will just reactivate all the time. I've had it sitting on my bench. You know, some of these packages over here that are open have been on my bench for, I don't know, like the 925's probably been there for 3 weeks. I just put it right back in there, put it back in the package, seal the package up, and I'm done. Okay, so this is what you do to your clay. First thing that you notice, it's not soft. It crunches on the ends, okay? So what I want you to do is roll it very thin all the way down, okay? I fold those two ends over, do it again. Fold those two ends over, do it again. That's how I get a good mix. So I know that it's mixing into itself. And you can tell already. Okay. Once you do that, you're going to feel the clay much, much nicer, much softer. Now I'm going to put it under my little cup here, put a little mist on there. X2O is the rehydrating fluid. It is similar to the old PMC aqua fluid. Okay. Warning, this is not water. Don't just use it as a replacement to water. It will break down your clay. Okay. Its purpose is to break the binder walls open a little bit, and that allows the binder to absorb water. You use like a drop of this and then a full mist of water, and that rehydrates well. I'm going to roll this clay out. I usually get it in a little pad first. Cut a couple of my circles. And I'm gonna let that just sit to the side. I'm gonna cut all three so I can get ahead for just a second here. And then I'm gonna explain the drying process, okay? Remember when you do your cutting, to use your awl straight up and down. That keeps your side walls of your piece straighter. That's how much clay I have left, which is plenty, okay? So you could definitely go bigger than this. Now, next most important thing about Project X, very important, it needs to shrink. If you don't let it shrink, you're going to get cracks, okay? So just the fact that it is stuck to this work surface doesn't allow it to shrink. So the first thing that I need to do is unhook it. Now, look at that already. Now, let's see if I can get you there. See how the surface of that is kind of matte already? That's the top edge. The bottom is shiny. That's sticky. This is not. Okay, so already just in a minute, the top has started to dry, but the bottom was sticking to the mat. Okay, we need to immediately turn them over. And really what I tell people is, if I want it to be flat, I'm going to babysit it. And what I mean by that is when this top surface now, which is, you know, what was the bottom originally, is matte, then I can turn it back over again. I can press it down. I can flip it a few times until it stops curling. It's shrinking is what's happening. And if it's not matte, it's sticking to whatever you have it on. Okay, so you need to make sure it doesn't stick. If it sticks, you're going to get cracks all around the outside of it. You do want to manage that a little better than you had to manage with the PMC. The PMC was a little bit drier clay, so as it shrunk, it would detach itself. This does not want to detach itself because it's got more of that elasticity in it. That elasticity is what sticks to things. Okay. I'm actually going to just have these back in front of me and babysit them air dry for a second because I don't want to have them do funky things. But you'll notice this is very, very creamy kind of paste. Okay. It is great for this design that we're going to do. So these are in pretty good shape. They're probably a little tiny bit damp, but they're firm enough for me to demonstrate on, so I'm going to go for it. You can see I got a tiny bit of warp. I'm going to use the curled up side to do this. The reason for that is if I get any more warp, I don't want to have a problem with the back attachments. I want to be able to have space there and not worry about a curl in, being in my way. So I'm going to paint my texture on the cupped surface, okay, if you've got any cup. We're going to paint a bit of a pattern around here, and I do this in sections. I'm going to use water just to show you what I'm doing so you can see the color a bit. And then I kind of turn it around, and I'm going to do that side, and then I'm going to come in here and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to come in here and do that, and then we'll put some little divot things in the middle. Okay, so that's the process that I'm going to use to get this pattern on here. Okay, so we'll get our paste open, and I like to use my brush pretty firm to do this, so it's not going to be too wet. I'm going to just brush that off. I'm going to pick up a pretty big glob. We'll call that nice and technical term here of paste. Okay, and I'm going to start on one side. I basically am horizontal with the table, and I'm kind of gently laying the paste out and then pulling it to the center. Okay, so you get a glob at the end and then all the way down to the table or the back plate at this end. Okay, so it's kind of like if you've ever decorated a cake, it's kind of like creating a little edge here and then bringing it in, pulling the clay flat. Okay, so that's the technique that we're going to use to create each one of these petals. And you can create as many petals as you'd like. What we tried to do with this project was give you some fun texture that wasn't a pre-made thing. You want to use the edge as a guide, and you don't want to make them too precise either. Okay, they'll look much more natural and organic. Make them all a little bit different. And then I turn this around so that I can do the other side. And now we're going to do some inside petals. So I'm going to start in here and not go all the way up. I find that it's easier to let the outside petals dry first and then come back into the center. Okay. But since I'm demonstrating, I'm trying to make it all a little faster for you. But if you've got time, let the outside ones dry up a little bit at least before you do the inside ones. Okay, so now I've got plenty of petals. Some of these guys in here, because I did this all wet, I'm going to come back in and use my brush just to put some lines into them, give it even more texture. And then the last step for making the petals is really to give a little center. So I'm going to let that dry before I try to go in and add a center to it. That is the basic process for doing this. I'll add a little more detail on my smaller ones, and I may go back before I fire this and add some more in there. You really want, as much texture on the ends as you can, okay? But I need to show you how to stipple. So I want my brush pretty dry. That's pretty good. And I'm just gonna poke the end of it in paste, but you can see I don't have too much paste, okay? And I'm gonna poke it straight down onto my piece right in the middle. I don't want to really leave lines, so I can kind of just add bumps. Basically, what I'm trying to do is just add little bumps, little tiny mountains of clay. That's going to give me a center to a flower, a little bit of design, and dry that again. So you're going to make all 3 pieces, and I'm going to work on my other ones. You can, there we go, there's a good angle. You can see the level of stippling in there, and you can kind of see the detail on the petals, okay? If I can get the angle, see the details on the petals a bit. Okay, so I need to put stippling on these 2. And again, I'm going to use kind of a bit of a dry brush to do this. Just poke it in there. Put as much or as little as you'd like on these. So I'm done with the texturing, and now I'm going to start the shaping of these petals. And this one's dry, so I'm going to use that one. All I'm going to do is follow the outline of the petal. So I need to just get my angles on here, and I might use a little pencil to show you what I'm talking about so that you can see it. You don't need to use a pencil. I'm just using a pencil to make it easier for you to see at home. So all I'm going to do is file away these areas between these petals to define the petals. I'm going to come in, if my point is right there, I'm going to take a pretty heavy grit, hold my piece gently, I'm supporting it on the front and the back. And so now you can see I've kind of cut the outline of that petal. Okay, last one. I'm just going to go in and kind of soften those up a little bit. I kind of come across the top to soften those edges so that I don't have sharp edges on any of it. So I'm doing different angles here. And something that I want you to notice as I do that, do you see how it's burnishing as I'm sanding it? That's what I mean about the different metal. This metal is so much more dense that you really, you can polish it almost all the way up in clay state. It's crazy. And I'll do more of that as I bring the edges of this down. I'll come across the top and show you what I mean. So I've kind of softened up those edges, and I'll watch this. Especially if you use it like a burnisher on it, it is unbelievable. And you don't really need to do it on these pieces. But if I have like a round piece, especially something with a really round edge on it, I like to do what I call, or I refer to as mudding it. You're going to use, this is just a piece of foam, okay? And I use a little bit of water. It doesn't soak into the foam. It's just kind of sitting on the outside of the foam. And I will run that and like rub it around the outside of my piece. That smooths the surfaces, okay? But it does another thing. If you have what is called a microfracture in your clay, you can't really see it, but when it shrinks, it opens up, and then you've got this big crack on an edge or something like that. If you have microfractures going on, this mud helps fill those gaps and close any microfractures that might be there. Okay. Now, again, you wouldn't have to do this on this kind of piece, but I just kind of like to do it. It helps soften up the edges and everything. And what we need for the jump rings are snake roller. I use some gauges to get them even around there. So I'm going to go with like a 1.5 millimeter gauge to do that, but I just do that at the end. And a 5 millimeter coffee straw to wrap this around. If you imagine a little snake roll, if we wrap it around this straw and make a coil and then cut the coil, you'll get a whole bunch of these little guys. So we're going to cut these down into C's, but we're going to make probably 4 to 5 of these just to be safe in case we break one. And to do that, your clay needs to be in good shape. The way that I really test my clay to see if it needs liquid, I make it thin. And if it's cracky like that when it's thin, that's how I know that I need to rehydrate my clay. This is how I rehydrate clay. I roll it out thin. I put a decent mist on there, fold it over, and I kind of seal up those edges just a little bit so that the water doesn't squirt out too terribly much. And then I kind of pat that, then fold it over, and I'm going to roll it and get that water mixed in. So now it's going to get a little bit messier. When it's not muddy, then I can use my fingers. This technique that I use when I roll leaves an end over, so I can always grab a clay. I probably want a snake roll about this big, 2 to 3 inches, maybe 3 inches would be safe. The reason that I want it to be thin is, if you look carefully at this now, there's a hole in this piece that I'm moving, and it goes around that jump ring. I've got this C, right? There's your C. It's on the back of that piece, okay? And I drilled a hole in the top of this other piece. That ring has to fit inside this hole that you drill, and you don't want a giant hole on the front of your piece. So you want these rings to be relatively thin. I would say 1.5 millimeters. That's about the size you want. You don't want big, giant, thick rings, okay? It'll look funky on the back of your piece, and your connections will have to be much deeper because you're going to have big holes that you have to drill. And you want to do this as fast as you can. I usually tell my students, when you're learning to do snake rolls, practice doing it and don't use those snake rolls because they're going to be crumbly if you're not fast. Now I'm going to roll it down to 1.5.
I'm going to wrap that around my coffee straw.
What I do if I see that happen when I'm rolling my snake rolls around a coil like this, I'll take my paintbrush. I'm just gonna mud in that space just in case. I don't want it to open up more. And then I'm gonna let this dry, okay? And this can dry on the heat. Once they're dry, then we're gonna learn how to cut them. I pulled my jump rings off of the dryer, and there is one crack right there that I don't like. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove that gently. And then I'm going to think about that. Actually, what I did was that whole ring, I think I just did not mud that ring very well. And it got a bunch of spots on it. It's got a whole bunch of little things right on one of the rings. So I am definitely not going to use that one. So I'm going to talk about the cutting and the options that you have. There are a lot of tools on the market for this. You can get, this is a double X-Acto. I love this tool. A regular X-Acto, you can actually get a saw blade for the end of it. So you could use a saw blade on an X-Acto to cut this. You can use a scalpel, or you can use something like this. This is called a mini saw. We sell these guys. It's probably my favorite tool for doing this. You'll see why as I use it. To cut this, I'm going to cut one straight line, and you'll see what happens when I do that. All the rings fall off, and it will look like that. So I'm going to hold it so that the place that I'm going to cut is between my fingers. What I want to do is cut off just a little bit of each one of those pieces. That's where we get scary, right? When you lay a jump ring down, one end sticks up and one end lays flat. You're going to cut the flat end. Don't try to cut the end that sticks up, because see what happens? You don't have stability. Now I need to file them flush. So it needs to fit flat against there so I have more surface contacting. So this is delicate. Next is the assembly. So I've got my 3 pieces, okay? I need to lay them out and find the way that they connect well, keeping in mind that I'm going to have to drill a hole in the 2 smaller pieces, okay? And then this top one is going to get a bail on it. So how is it going to hang, right? If you notice on this piece, I used a bit of a pedal to help me hide that link and then drill my hole. There we go. I like that best. So if the top of my pendant is here with the bail, and this is the bottom, that I can use that dip to connect my link onto the back of it. Okay. So I like that dip as the bottom. So then the next question is, where am I going to put my hole in the second piece? Okay. How do I want that one to hang? And I kind of think right there. See that? Last piece. There we go. Just like that. So the first thing that I need to do is mark where I'm going to drill these holes. You definitely need to drill far enough away from the edge so that you don't cause a crack on the edge. And remember, it needs to be a big enough hole to accommodate the width of this thing, you know? So it's got to be in there pretty far. It's got to be down here pretty far. The other thing I need to do is on the back of these pieces, mark where I'm going to put my links. Okay, so I know I'm going to put a link right here, make a line right there because that's where my link's going to go. And then on the back of this one, that bottom petal is my link, so I'm going to put that there. Time to drill these holes. When I do these, I put my finger on the back of it so that I kind of drill into my finger. That helps support the metal clay so it doesn't crack or break. Keep everything out though, because I do need to fit it together. So the first thing I got to decide is which rings I'm going to use to do it. So now I got to fit this ring loosely into this hole. The way that you do that is just take your ring, see how far off you are. Okay. So I'm going to increase that size. That feels pretty good. See that? I can pretty easily slide it around in there. Those are ready. I'm ready to assemble. Bottom of this piece where I drew that little line is right here. So that is where my ring is going to go. And that's this ring. So the way that you have to attach this is by leaving your ring like this. Okay, this is the front of the next piece. And we're going to lay it down onto there with paste. I'm going to put a little water back here. Let that soak in for a second. So this would be a great use for the syringe as well if you like using syringe. Small glob right on the end of there. I like to do this by shifting direction so that I look at the alignment, because when you're going straight down, you can't really see the alignment of everything. So I kind of do this a little bit. And then I'm just gently going to lay that whole thing down. These are the best tweezers for doing this kind of work. By doing this, I can align it a little bit. Now I need to dry this really quick. If I don't do that, I really can't connect that next one. And now, really, really delicate. And I'm going to turn it sideways so that I can see both sides. And I'm going to put paste wherever I can. And now I got to put the next one on. I've got my piece, and this one already had the second level of paste on it. The top of this one had quite a bit, but I'm not sure how the bottom of this piece is doing. So, and I'm going to leave that in that position for a minute and let it set. What I need to do is find a straw that fits that well. There's a good one. Okay. And I'm just going to do this with no texture just to make this simpler, but you could absolutely add texture to it if you want. And this is how I make a veil. Cut one end. I cut a straight line one way. I cut another side. I'm going to kind of cut it about there. And then when it's dry, I can sand it and make it round to match my flowers. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry. My piece, remember I was drying kind of like this. So now I really need to get it all lined up and make sure that it moves. Now my bail. So I'm going to go ahead and do that so you can see how to do that. Oh, I remember the other thing. I need to show them how to rehydrate completely dry clay. So I'm going to paste that back together. Like I said, I wouldn't normally do that. Paste that back together. So to attach it to the back of my pendant, I need to look at where the alignment is again, right? So I'm going to want that thing right there. And I'm going to use paste for this, not just water. Okay, so I squish it really nice and tight right there. After it's dry, it is ready to fire. I'm going to talk about the firing setup for this project. You could torch fire this, okay? If you did choose to torch fire it, you still have to support it, which means you still need to be torch firing on vermiculite or sand or fiber blanket. This piece needs support. If you torch fire it, keep it on the lower side of the firing temperature color, okay? Don't go bright, bright, bright orange. The hotter you are, the closer you are to that melt point, and you could fuse those links together. Best center level for the 999s is 1650 Fahrenheit, 898 Celsius for 30 minutes. Don't fire more than that, okay? If you do, you can actually melt the metal. That's the fine silver. You can torch fire it. If you torch fire it generally high in that bright orange color range for 2 minutes, okay? And I will demonstrate that because I want you to see the center level. For this piece, it needs to be supported. You've got these little things on the back, right? I want to fire it. It's going to cup or flatten depending on which direction you fire it. If you fire it petals up or petals down, okay? So I like to do that petals up. That means all of these protrusions on the back need to be able to go into something so that the piece can lay flat. That is why we're using the support. You can use fiber blanket, you can use vermiculite, you can use silica sand. There are lots of different things available out there. I use vermiculite, so I'm going to show you what that looks like. Vermiculite is grainy, goldish colored looking stuff. This is a stainless steel pan. It's just a short one, okay, that I use in my kiln with the vermiculite. And I would make this very flat, right in the middle where I would put that piece so that I can, again, as these slump, I'd like them to slump flat. And I lay that right down in there and fire just like that. If you fire it upside down like this, you'll get more cup and curl on the front of them. It wants to lay down, but it's got that natural curl to it. And so the weight of the center isn't enough to push it down flat. The outsides will pull in. Okay, so that's why we fire it this way if we want it to be flat. It depends on your design, if it curls or not curls. This didn't curl at all. So that is how to fire this particular project.